In the quiet, forested hills of western Pennsylvania, there exists a mysterious collection of church relics that no historian has ever been able to trace. Scattered across 17 congregations from the cobblestone streets of Philadelphia to the rugged edge of frontier settlements are small bone fragments and bits of preserved flesh encased in ornate reliquaries. Their origins, obscured by time, and by something far more sinister. Between 1745 and 1792, more than 73 individuals vanished from these devout communities, men, women, and most disturbingly, orphaned children. All were later canonized as saints by local religious leaders, but buried in the sealed archives of the Philadelphia Historical Society is a manuscript long forgotten that tells a very different story. According to the hidden testimonies of 3 terrified witnesses, the truth lies in the Whitmore family workshop, a place where, for nearly 50 years, human bodies were turned into holy relics. That manuscript has remained locked away for centuries, protected by the churches involved. But through relentless research and piecing together forbidden records, I've uncovered a horror the religious establishment has worked desperately to erase. Before we continue into the twisted legacy of the Whitmore family, hit subscribe if you're brave enough to explore the dark corners of history most fear to even mention. And tell me, what state are you listening from? Because some of these secrets may be closer than you think. Now, let's journey into the shadows of America's colonial past. In the mid-18th century, Pennsylvania stood as a unique religious refuge. Philadelphia and its surrounding counties were dominated by Quakers' humble meeting houses, plain speech, and an emphasis on the inner light. But further west, on the bleeding edge of colonized land, faith took on different forms. Presbyterians, Lutherans, and smaller Protestant sects built simple wooden churches deep in the wilds, staking spiritual claims alongside physical ones. It was here, in Chester County, just 30 miles from Philadelphia, that the Whitmore family took root in 1742. Nathaniel Whitmore, recently arrived from England, was a man of quiet intensity, stern-faced with steel-gray eyes and a trimmed beard. He presented himself as a devout craftsman, a maker of sacred objects, chalices, communion plates, ornate Bible covers. His pieces quickly gained favor among churches eager to display their spiritual superiority. The Whitmore workshop, a sturdy 2-story timber structure nestled among 12 wooded acres, became a sought-after stop for ministers and church elders. Sunlight poured through its broad windows, illuminating works of sacred art. And perhaps something far darker, Nathaniel's wife, Elizabeth, was known for her poise and precision. Neighbors admired her control even when they found it cold. She ran the household and raised 4 children with clockwork efficiency. Their eldest, Thomas, assisted his father in the workshop. Daughters Mary and Sarah helped at home, but it was the youngest, William, who left the deepest impression. A sickly child with a fixed, intense gaze, William spent long hours wandering the forest alone. He would return with plants, bones, and small animals meticulously preserved and displayed in his room. His parents, oddly supportive, encouraged the hobby as scientific curiosity. Life in Chester County was not easy. Winters were brutal. Crops sometimes failed. The threat of conflict always loomed. And yet, this era also saw spiritual revival. The Great Awakening had ignited a religious wildfire across the colonies. Churches competed not just for souls, but for status, building larger sanctuaries and commissioning more extravagant religious artifacts. The Whitmores, with their reputation and connections, thrived in this atmosphere. By 1745, Nathaniel's business had grown enough to take on 2 apprentices. One of them, Jacob Miller. What Jacob would witness in that workshop would haunt him until his final breath. The first relic, the disappearance of Mary Peter Collins, a quiet young man from a poor Philadelphia family, was the orphaned son of German immigrants. The Collins family lived modestly, ever lavish, yet never in want. Their reputation for hard work and religious devotion made them well respected in the community. A reputation that hid the darker truths concealed behind the closed doors of their workshop after sundown. In the late autumn of 1745, Mary Collins, a devout Quaker and respected healer known for her charitable visits to the sick, vanished on her way home from aiding a family on the edge of Chester County. Her disappearance caused brief alarm but was soon attributed, as many were in those times, to either an Indian attack or a wild animal encounter. No one then could have guessed that. Mary Collins's disappearance marked the beginning of a macabre enterprise, one that would persist unnoticed for nearly 50 years. On the evening of November 17, 1745, as an early winter storm swept through Chester County, Mary set off on her final journey. Grey-haired and weathered from decades of selfless service, she pulled her wool cloak tighter against a bitter wind. The dirt path she walked, rutted and frozen, led past the Whitmore property. From the workshop windows, lantern light flickered, according to a confession later discovered hidden behind a loose stone in a Philadelphia prison wall. Thomas Whitmore, then just 16, watched from the window that night. His deathbed account revealed the chilling truth. Father had been watching her for weeks. Thomas wrote in shaky script. He said God had chosen her. Her saintly reputation made her perfect. He told us we were to become instruments of holiness, sacred vessels, he called them. As Mary neared the edge of the property, Nathaniel Whitmore, Thomas's father, stepped from the trees with a lantern and a tale of desperation. His young son, William, had wandered off into the woods and hadn't returned. Without hesitation, Mary offered her help, following him deeper into the woods, away from the safety of the road and toward the workshop's rear entrance, obscured behind pine trees. Mother had prepared the back room, Thomas continued. Canvas sheets were laid across the floor. I didn't yet understand. I thought they meant to create symbols of faith, relics to inspire devotion. Here, Thomas's handwriting faltered into illegibility, the trembling script no longer forming coherent words. What occurred in that room was never fully detailed, but the aftermath was. Over the next 3 days, Mary Collins's body was methodically preserved. Nathaniel, who had studied anatomical preservation from Old English medical texts, taught his son how to treat the tissue using salts, herbs, and other substances to prevent decay. Elizabeth Whitmore, Thomas's mother, stitched small, velvet pouches, each embroidered with golden religious symbols. Father said we were doing the Lord's work, Thomas wrote. He claimed Protestant churches lacked the power of the Catholic relics, that we would provide holy vessels to restore true worship in the colonies. And God forgive me, I believed him. 2 weeks after Mary's disappearance, Nathaniel traveled to Philadelphia. He returned with more commissions than ever and a large sum of money. At the next Quaker meeting, he spoke tearfully about our dear friend Mary and proposed a memorial in her honor. During the service, he presented a finely carved altar box, claiming he had made it in Mary's memory. What no one knew was that inside a hidden compartment of that box lay a small piece of Mary Collins, preserved, sanctified in their eyes, and presented as a sacred relic. As winter passed into spring, stories began to circulate out of Philadelphia. Whispers spread of miraculous healings tied to a relic housed in a small Episcopal church, the first of many. The legacy of Mary Collins, the first of the holy relics, had begun. The rector claimed it was nothing short of a mere fragment of bone, supposedly from an unknown 18th-century saint, had cured 3 parishioners of their ailments. According to him, the bone had been acquired through a European dealer, brokered by a local craftsman. That craftsman was Nathaniel Whitmore. By 1750, the Whitmore family business had grown substantially. Their workshop had doubled in size, employing 5 young apprentices who fashioned ornate boxes, chalices, and religious items, the visible face of the Whitmore legacy. But none of those boys were ever allowed into the cellar rooms beneath the workshop. That's where the real work happened. As their trade expanded, so did their home, a formidable 2-story house of stone and timber, a monument to their rising fortune. Meanwhile, the disappearance of Mary Collins, once whispered about, had faded from local memory. In her place were rumors, occasional mentions of others who had vanished, a visiting preacher here, a devout widow there. They were always people without strong family ties, their absences quietly chalked up to the dangers of colonial travel or the ever-convenient Indian troubles. But something had changed in the Whitmore's process. According to a journal discovered in 1823 during the demolition of the abandoned Whitmore home, Sarah Whitmore, Nathaniel's wife, claimed she had developed what she called the discernment. She wrote that God spoke to her, revealing which souls were destined for sainthood after death. Her chilling belief allowed the family to see their killings not as murder, but as holy work. They were simply helping the chosen reach their heavenly purpose. A little early, the family had also refined the crafting and distribution of their relics. Nathaniel forged ties with Protestant church leaders across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and as far south as Virginia. These relationships were built through generous donations, exquisite craftsmanship, and confidential whispers of rare European religious artifacts soon to be available. Thomas Whitmore, the eldest son, would later confess, Father told them the Catholic Church had hoarded sacred power for centuries. He convinced these ministers that acquiring relics quietly would bring power to their congregations, without needing to adopt Catholic doctrine. It worked especially with ambitious preachers, hungry for growth. Their operations soon included a discreet network of collaborators, most of them unaware of the truth, who reported miracles occurring in churches where Whitmore relics were placed. These testimonies were then used to lure new buyers, driving demand and prices higher. Nathaniel instructed clergy to keep the relics hidden from congregations, describing them as sacred trusts known only to elders. This secrecy not only limited exposure, it also inflated their value. What none of the customers knew was that these so-called European relics had never crossed an ocean, that were crafted from the bodies of their own neighbors, preserved and transformed beneath the Whitmore workshop. In the spring of 1753, the truth nearly surfaced. Dr. Samuel Winters, a physician from Lancaster, examined a relic at the request of a patient who swore it had healed him, but Dr. Winters noticed something was wrong. The tissue didn't match the supposed age, and the preservation technique wasn't consistent with anything used in Europe. Before he could alert anyone, Dr. Winters vanished while traveling between Lancaster and Philadelphia. His body was never recovered. A month later, a small wooden case appeared in a Presbyterian church in New York containing what was labeled the fingerbone of a 12th century healer. The years went on. The Whitmore children were raised in the family trade. Thomas became his father's trusted aide, while William, the youngest and most unsettling, grew fascinated with the art of preservation. He experimented with methods that made their relics appear older, more sacred, more believable. And all the while, the relics continued to circulate, revered, prayed over, trophies of holiness, born in darkness. As the Whitmore legacy grew, was Mary and Ceretha, daughters who quietly managed the family's finances and correspondence. They maintained a facade of respectability, laundering their considerable profits through a web of legitimate business ventures. While the American colonies edged closer to revolution, the political upheaval created fertile ground for the Whitmore family's expansion. The disruption of trade with England caused a severe shortage of religious goods. Seizing the opportunity, the Whitmores positioned their workshop as one of the few reliable suppliers for churches across the colonies. Ever calculating, the family struck a delicate balance, displaying just enough patriotic fervor to avoid suspicion, yet never aligning too closely with either side. This strategic neutrality allowed them to conduct business uninterrupted, no matter which faction held power. But as the Revolutionary War drew to a close, a darker chapter in the Whitmore family's tale began to unfold, one that would ultimately lead to their grim downfall. The year was 1781. While the colonies celebrated the promise of independence, the Whitmores discovered a new sinister market for their grotesque enterprise. The post-war years saw churches in ruins and a spiritual hunger sweeping through the populace. Communities scarred by bloodshed craved hope and healing. Demand for religious artifacts soared, and with it, the Whitmores' ambitions. In February 1782, the first child vanished. 10-year-old Joseph Miller had been placed in a Philadelphia church-run orphanage after his parents succumbed to smallpox. Small for his age, quiet, and deeply devout, Joseph often led the other children in prayer. He was beloved by the clergy, yet one night, he simply disappeared. A brief investigation followed, the conclusion he had likely run away. It was not uncommon in such institutions, but just 3 months later, something strange occurred. The Church of St. Michael in eastern Pennsylvania claimed to have acquired a miraculous relic, the preserved heart of a child martyr from the early church. Parishioners swore that prayers offered before it healed the sick, especially children. Word spread, attendance surged, donations poured in, and demand for such miraculous relics exploded. According to a passage in Sarah Whitmore's journal written in shaky, tear-stained ink, William suggested, "The children," he said, "their innocence made them more powerful vessels for divine work." Father hesitated, but the prophet convinced him. "God help me, I knew it was wrong, yet I said nothing." Between 1782 and 1785, at least 16 children, the desperately poor, vanished from towns and villages within a day's ride of the Whitmore estate. Each case was quickly dismissed, lost to the wilderness, taken by traffickers, or simply swallowed by the cruel conditions of early American life. Yet during that same period, churches across the Northeast began acquiring relics unlike any seen before: preserved hearts, bones of child martyrs. Their supposed spiritual potency made them incredibly valuable, often selling for 5 times the price of adult relics. The Whitmores profited immensely, expanding their influence and wealth, buying land, investing in business, and forging political connections that insulated them from scrutiny. To meet the growing demand, the family initiated 2 trusted apprentices into their secrets, One of them, Daniel Foster, would one day become key to their unraveling. In the fall of 1785, a Quaker minister named Elijah Thompson was appointed by the Philadelphia yearly meeting to investigate strange religious practices in outlying communities. Formerly trained in law, Thompson had earned a reputation for navigating church disputes with sharp intellect and unshakable principle. What he would discover would bring the Whitmore dynasty crashing down and expose one of the most horrific and hidden crimes in early American religious history. Elijah Thompson, a devout Quaker minister, was given a troubling assignment to investigate disturbing reports of Catholic-like practices, seeping into even the plainest of Quaker meetings. These included the veneration of relics and saint-like figures, practices fundamentally at odds with the Quaker belief in direct communion with the divine. In his journal, now preserved in the sealed collection of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, Thompson wrote, "Such idolatry runs counter to our faith, yet several meeting houses had acquired strange objects said to enhance spiritual experiences." His inquiry began in Philadelphia, where a pattern soon emerged. Many of the so-called relics had been acquired through intermediaries, most of whom, in one way or another, led back to a single man, Nathaniel Whitmore. The provenance of the relics was elaborate, cloaked in stories that seemed credible at first glance, but to Thompson, trained in both theology and law, the documents raised red flags. The details were impressive, yes, but none could be historically verified. In December 1785, Thompson traveled to Chester County to meet Whitmore in person. He described the encounter in his journal. "Whitmore received me warmly in his home, offering refreshments and engaging conversation. He was articulate, theologically well-versed, and disarmingly gracious." When Thompson inquired about the artifacts produced in Whitmore's workshop, he was shown a public workroom where apprentices crafted ornate communion ware and church decorations. Whitmore proudly displayed his connections to European suppliers, presenting documents meant to prove the relic's authenticity. But again, inconsistencies leaped out at Thompson, subtle but glaring to a trained eye. Though unsettled, Thompson had no concrete proof of wrongdoing. He pressed on, interviewing clergy who had purchased Whitmore relics and documenting the miracles attributed to them. A disturbing trend began to surface. The most sensational events often involved witnesses with indirect ties to the Whitmore family. These individuals surfaced again and again, appearing in different towns, testifying to wonders then vanishing. "I began to suspect a deliberate scheme," Thompson wrote. "Not just the manufacture of relics, but the fabrication of miracles." As his investigation deepened, strange events began to plague him. Items vanished from his lodgings. Important letters never arrived. Worst of all, key evidence including notes, testimonies, and forged documents disappeared from a locked trunk while he slept at a roadside inn. In February 1786, Thompson returned to Philadelphia to report his findings to the yearly meeting committee. The night before his presentation, he dined at the home of a respected Quaker elder. During the meal, he became violently ill. Physicians later confirmed poisoning, though no source was found. He survived, but his health was shattered, forcing a temporary halt to his work. During his long recovery, a new figure entered the story, one who would unravel the full horror of the Whitmore family's operations. Daniel Foster, a young apprentice in Whitmore's workshop, came forward. Racked with guilt and plagued by nightmares, Foster described in graphic detail the inner workings of the family business. He claimed to have witnessed the processing of human remains, most shockingly, that of a 12-year-old orphan girl from a Methodist children's home. Foster had fled in the dead of night, carrying with him a secret journal in which he had recorded dates, names, and chilling details. When he finally gathered the courage to meet Thompson in Philadelphia, the minister, still weak from poisoning, listened in horror. The young man shook as he spoke. Thompson later wrote, "His account me to the marrow." Foster described a hidden chamber beneath the workshop, a grisly cellar where bodies were suspended from iron hooks, fluids drained into vessels below. He spoke of surgical tools used to remove organs and bone with almost clinical precision, and of preservation techniques using salt, alcohol, and herbs to maintain the tissue's lifelike appearance for months, even years. But what haunted Thompson most was Foster's account of the Whitmores themselves, calm, methodical, even reverent. Before each processing, Nathaniel and his wife Elizabeth would lead solemn prayers, thanking God for choosing these vessels for a divine purpose, and blessing those who would eventually receive them. What Thompson uncovered was not just deception or sacrilege. It was something far darker, a family cloaked in piety, profiting from desecration, a cult of relic makers masquerading as holy artisans, and a network of believers unknowingly worshipping fragments of the dead. The investigation, once about counterfeit faith, had revealed something else entirely, a sacred horror. Armed with Foster's harrowing testimony and detailed journal, Elijah Thompson was ready to act. But before he could present his findings to the authorities, disaster struck. A mysterious fire consumed his Philadelphia residence, destroying all of Foster's documentation. As if coordinated, Foster himself vanished the next day. His fate remained unknown until 3 weeks later, when partial remains were discovered in the Delaware River, identified only by the unique boot buckles he always wore. Undeterred, Thompson pressed on, but with far greater caution. He abandoned written records, relying solely on trusted confidants, cryptic ciphers, and a growing network of informants. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to rebuild his case against the powerful and secretive Whitmore family. By late 1786, his findings were staggering. Thompson had connected 27 disappearances directly to the Whitmore operation and had identified 9 churches unknowingly displaying human remains disguised as sacred relics. Yet, one critical piece still eluded him: physical evidence compelling enough to convince skeptical authorities to act against a family deeply entrenched in Pennsylvania's elite society. Then, in the winter of 1787, help came from the most unexpected source: Sarah Whitmore herself. That year brought severe snows, isolating the Whitmore compound for weeks at a time. Within the cold walls of their estate, deep fractures in the family began to widen. Sarah, now 32 and unmarried, had long kept a private journal her only outlet, under the watchful eye of a father who had discouraged any suitors who might take her from the family business. As the snow piled high outside, the weight of her complicity began to crush her. "I can no longer sleep without seeing their faces," she wrote in December 1787. "The children especially haunt me. William has become something inhuman. Last week, he spoke of preserving entire limbs for sale as relics. Mother encouraged him, quoting scripture about holy vessels. I cannot bear much more of this." Sarah's emotional collapse coincided with a dangerous escalation in the family's activities. The child relics were lucrative. William, now 27, and assuming more control as Nathaniel's health declined, pushed for increased production. He argued that the post-revolution religious revival had created a market, desperate for spiritual artifacts, but that meant more victims, more risk. William's solution was chilling: target isolated frontier settlements, where missing children would draw less attention. Nathaniel, weakened and slipping into illness, reluctantly handed over leadership to William, despite Brother Thomas's warnings that such expansion was reckless. Then came January 1788, the turning point. 2 events sealed the Whitmore family's fate. First, William returned from western Pennsylvania with 3 new victims, all children from a remote village decimated by winter disease. The family's systems, efficient though they were, couldn't keep up. Partially preserved remains were left in the workshop cellar. A breach of protocol that risked discovery. Second, and far more consequential, Sarah Whitmore made her move. On a rare solo trip to Philadelphia, she sought out Elijah Thompson. She had learned of his investigation from family surveillance logs. Sarah had quietly followed her father's paranoia and knew Thompson was the only one who might stop them. Their meeting took place in the back room of a Quaker bookshop and lasted over 3 hours. Thompson's coded journal entries, later decoded, revealed the magnitude of her confession. Female W confirmed all suspicions and, worse, family operation more extensive than documented. Estimate: 70+ adult victims, 20 children. Detailed processing methods, names of participating church officials, see encoded list. Underground chamber beneath workshop holds remains in various states. Archive of all victims. Small preserved samples labeled by name and date. Map provided. Sarah gave him everything: names, methods, locations, even a hand-drawn map of the workshop compound, including the secret chamber beneath it. It was the break Thompson had waited for. What followed would shake the foundations of every institution involved. She led them to the hidden entrance buried beneath the floorboards of the workshop, a passageway that descended into the underground processing chamber. But that wasn't all Sarah revealed. She spoke of a ledger, meticulously kept by Elizabeth Whitmore herself, documenting every acquisition and every distribution since the business began. It was a horrifying archive, decades of darkness preserved in ink. If obtained, it would be irrefutable proof. "I know I condemn myself by speaking these things," Sarah reportedly told Elijah Thompson. "I expect no mercy in this world, or the next. but the children's faces, they give me no peace. I can no longer let my family's work feed on innocence. Thompson, understanding both the value and the danger of Sarah's revelations, acted swiftly, rather than allow her to return to the Whitmore compound. He arranged for her to hide with trusted Quaker allies. This decision, however noble, would ignite the final confrontation. When Sarah failed to return, William Whitmore knew instantly she had betrayed them. According to Thomas Whitmore's later confession, the family gathered that night in the study for what would become their last council. William, cold with fury, paced like a caged beast, suggesting one violent solution after another. Their father, frail, sunken into his chair, murmured biblical verses about Judas, betrayal, and divine punishment. Their mother remained eerily composed. She listed vulnerabilities, one by one, what Sarah knew, what needed to be destroyed. Thomas, fearful, urged the family to flee, to abandon everything and start again. But William would not surrender what he saw as his divine inheritance. In the end, they devised a ruthless plan. William would silence her. Meanwhile, Elizabeth would oversee the relocation of their most damning evidence to an abandoned mineshaft on the western edge of the estate, a secret storage site prepared long ago for such a day. What the Whitmore family didn't know was that Thompson was already moving. He had gone beyond the county, fearful of local authorities who might be loyal to the Whitmores. He reached out instead to Philadelphia's Quaker leadership, men of conscience, men of influence. They, in turn, brought word to trusted officials in the new state government. By February 12, 1788, the plan was set. A raid would expose the Whitmore legacy for what it truly was. But fate is cruel. The night before the raid, a snowstorm swept across Chester County, blinding, merciless. Thompson faced a choice: delay the raid and risk the Whitmores destroying everything, or proceed with fewer men. He chose to act. That night he left Philadelphia with only 6 men, 2 constables. For Quaker volunteers, together they would walk into history and into horror. February 13, 1788. The winds howled. Snow slashed sideways across the black Pennsylvania countryside. Thompson's party arrived just after nightfall. Lanterns flickered in the wind as they followed Sarah's hand-drawn map, not toward the grand house but to the workshop. We moved like ghosts through the storm. James Pearson would later write in a sealed affidavit. The wind masked our steps, but robbed us of hearing. We could see nothing, and worse, hear nothing. The workshop windows glowed late at night, light inside. It was a sign they were expected. The men took positions. Thompson and 2 constables approached the door. He knocked. "We come on official business." Silence. Then the door creaked open. It was Thomas Whitmore, tall, still backlit by flickering lanterns inside the workshop. He did not flinch. He did not speak. He counted them silently, then stepped aside. "If you must," he said. Pearson would never forget that look. Not surprise, not fear, but a calm acceptance, as if the man had been waiting for this very night. Inside the workshop appeared ordinary tools arranged with precision, half-finished crosses and altarpieces on the benches. Holy work. But Sarah had told them, below that floor, behind the facade, lay something else entirely. A hidden world of darkness, of ritual, of horror. What Thompson and his men would uncover beneath those floorboards would scar them all forever. The scent of wood shavings and varnish clung thick in the air. Thomas Whitmore stood with his hands clasped before him, answering Thompson's pointed questions with brief, monosyllabic replies. Yet his eyes kept drifting again, and again toward a tall cabinet against the far wall. Following his gaze, Constable William Bradford crossed the workshop and opened the cabinet, finding it unlocked. Inside, rather than tools or supplies, lay a black velvet pouch. Within it, nestled carefully, was what appeared to be a preserved human finger. At the sight of this, Thomas Whitmore's demeanor changed dramatically. Bradford would later testify that the young man dropped to his knees, murmuring what seemed a mixture of prayers and confessions. When pressed about his family, Thomas revealed that his father was gravely ill in the main house, while his mother and brother William had departed hours earlier with several large trunks. Heading west toward the edge of the property. Thompson immediately ordered 2 men to intercept Elizabeth and William. Meanwhile, he and the others turned their full attention back to Thomas, urging him to reveal the location of the rumored underground chamber. At first, Thomas resisted, but eventually, with trembling hands, he led them to a heavy workbench. When pushed aside, it revealed a trapdoor embedded in the floor. The moment it was opened, a wave of foul air surged upward. "It struck us like a physical blow," Pearson later wrote in his journal. a miasma of chemical preservatives mixed with the unmistakable stench of human decay. Thomas lit a lantern and descended the narrow wooden stairs. The darkness below seemed to devour the light as the men followed. What they discovered beneath the workshop defied comprehension. The chamber stretched far beneath the structure, a network of rooms carved from the earth and shored up with timber beams. The first room resembled a surgical theater more than a workshop. Workbenches held tools designed for cutting flesh, not wood. Glass jars filled with unidentifiable fluids lined the walls. A stone floor sloped toward a large central drain, connected to a network of carved channels. Everything was in perfect order. Bradford noted that surgical instruments were arranged by type and size, and notebooks lay open to pages filled with anatomical drawings and precise preservation instructions. But the horror deepened as they entered the next room. There, 3 bodies hung from iron hooks fixed to the ceiling beams, to adults and a child, no older than 10. Each had been partially dissected with chilling precision. Preservatives gave their exposed tissues a pale, wax-like sheen. It was a scene that silenced even the bravest among them. The third chamber was the most disturbing of all. Thomas, his voice flat and hollow, referred to it only as the archive. Floor-2 ceiling shelves lined every wall, filled with hundreds of small, labeled wooden boxes. Random inspection revealed that each box held a preserved human fragment, a section of bone, a piece of skin, a small organ. Each was carefully catalogued, as if part of some grotesque library. At the center of the room stood a large wooden table, atop which rested a thick ledger, Elizabeth Whitmore's business record. This massive volume, Thompson later wrote, documented in chillingly practical terms the acquisition, processing, and distribution of human remains. Relics, they called them, sold to churches across the eastern seaboard. Each entry listed the name of the victim, the body parts taken, the church that received them, the price paid, and false histories invented to give the relics legitimacy. When asked how the family chose their victims, Thomas answered in a whisper. That froze the room. Mother had the discernment, he said. She could feel it, those whose bodies would produce the most powerful relics, the devout, the innocent, the ones whose suffering made them sacred. In total, the Whitmore family had processed 79 adults and 22 children since beginning the operation in 1745, supplying relics to more than 40 churches across 7 states. The wealth they amassed was carefully laundered through respectable businesses and real estate. What lay beneath that workshop was not just a chamber of horrors, it was a cathedral of deceit, built on suffering, sanctified by profit, and hidden in the shadow of faith. She had taught William to see it too, the signs, the potential. Together, they watched during church gatherings and revival meetings, quietly identifying those whose flesh might bring forth miracles. The investigation of the underground chambers stretched on for hours. The men documented everything they found, though their hands trembled and their minds struggled to comprehend the horror. Just before dawn, a commotion from above forced them back to the main level of the workshop. They found the 2 men who had been dispatched to intercept Elizabeth and William Whitmore. One was gravely wounded, blood soaking his shoulder from a deep knife wound. William fought like a man possessed. The injured man gasped. We found them at the abandoned mineshaft, just as Thomas described, transferring boxes from a wagon into the entrance. When we confronted them, Elizabeth tried to bribe us, begged for our silence. William circled behind and struck without warning. He killed my companion instantly, slit his throat with the skill of a butcher. They fled into the forest, carrying what they could. At daybreak, a broader manhunt was organized. Messengers were sent to alert authorities in neighboring counties. Nathaniel Whitmore was found in the family's main house, too frail with illness to have taken part in the recent horrors. He offered no resistance. One moment he babbled about divine purpose, the next he seemed lost, a man unmoored from reality. Search for Elizabeth and William continued for 3 days. Its end was as unsettling as everything that had come before. 12 miles from the Whitmore estate, in a small hunting cabin, their bodies were discovered. They lay side by side on a makeshift altar, fashioned from wood and stone. Both had taken poison after completing a ritual whose purpose remains unclear. Notes found at the scene suggested they believed their deaths would sanctify the relics they had saved during their escape. In April 1788, Thomas Whitmore was tried in Philadelphia. The proceedings were conducted under heavy secrecy due to the shocking nature of the crimes. He confessed in full, his account matching the gruesome evidence discovered at the compound. He was hanged on May 7, 1788, but the most difficult question remained: what to do with the hundreds of human remains already distributed as holy relics to unsuspecting churches. After long deliberation between government officials and religious leaders, a disturbing consensus was reached. Full disclosure, they feared would shatter the fragile spiritual foundation of the young republic. Judge William Bradford wrote in a sealed memorandum, "We must shield the faithful from truths that might destroy their belief. The churches that participated in this horror, unknowingly or not, must not be publicly shamed, nor should the trust of their congregations be shattered." All investigation records were sealed for a minimum of 100 years. Officials were sworn to silence. The churches were informed privately of the relics' true origins and offered two options: allow the remains to be collected for quiet Christian burial in unmarked graves, or handle the matter themselves discreetly, without government involvement. Most chose the latter. But what no one anticipated was a third response, one darker than anything yet uncovered. Of the 43 churches listed in Elizabeth Whitmore's ledger, at least 17 chose to keep the relics. They continued presenting them as holy artifacts, fully aware of their horrifying origins. In his final report before the records were sealed, Thompson noted grimly, "Some clergy justified this decision with chilling pragmatism. The relics had brought miracles, and who among them was prepared to deny the faith of the people, even if it was built on bones?" Though the true origins of the remains could never be definitively proven, many still claimed that miracles occurred in their presence. Perhaps, they reasoned, God had sanctified these poor souls through their unwilling sacrifice. Others took a more pragmatic view, pointing to the surge in church donations, higher attendance, and the elevated status that came from possessing such powerful relics. To surrender these advantages, they argued, would harm their congregations, more than continuing the deception. But Reverend Thompson, guided by unwavering moral conviction, found such reasoning abhorrent. In his final efforts, he compiled a confidential registry, meticulously documenting every identifiable victim of the Whitmore family, along with the known locations of their remains. This list, sealed with the rest of the case files, was meant to preserve their names from total erasure and ensure that proper memorials could someday be offered, when the truth was at last permitted to surface. The Whitmore estate itself was consumed by fear. A blaze officially declared accidental, though multiple accounts suggested local authorities had set it deliberately to destroy what evidence remained of the unspeakable horrors perpetrated there. The land, once cleared, was quietly reclaimed by the state and parceled out to families with no knowledge of its grim past. Sarah Whitmore, whose courage had exposed her family's crimes, was given a new identity and relocated to Boston, where she lived under Quaker protection until her death in 1823. Her journal, faithfully kept until her final days, reveals a woman tormented by guilt yet determined to seek redemption through good works, especially for orphaned and abandoned children. "I cannot undo what my family wrought," she wrote in her final entry. "But each child I helped to safety and education stands against the darkness we created. I have lived 40 years trying to balance scales that cannot be truly balanced. I go to my judgment expecting no mercy, only hoping that those we harmed have found the peace we stole from them." Although the physical evidence, the surgical tools, preservation formulas, and workshop apparatus was reportedly destroyed after the trial, rumors persisted. Whispers in medical circles suggested that certain items had been quietly preserved by private collectors or medical schools intrigued by the Whitmore's pioneering, if macabre, preservation techniques. Of particular interest were the methods developed by William Whitmore to maintain the lifelike appearance and flexibility of preserved human tissue. Early 19th century medical texts make oblique references to similar processes and uncredited, but eerily familiar. The story of the Whitmore family might have faded into permanent obscurity were it not for a fire at the Philadelphia courthouse in 1879. As water-damaged documents were removed for restoration, several sealed packets from the 1788 trial were mistakenly included with routine files. A clerk discovered part of Reverend Thompson's registry and a fragment of Thomas Whitmore's confession. Though the documents were quickly resealed, whispers began to circulate among courthouse staff. Eventually, the rumors reached a reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. The ensuing article, published on November 17, 1879, exactly 134 years after Mary Collins became the Whitmore's first victim, recounted a sensational, though factually flawed version of the crimes. Religious leaders swiftly denounced it as blasphemous fiction, and the story was soon retracted under pressure from the church. With the sealed records still inaccessible, the reporter could not prove his claims. By that time, Most churches that had knowingly kept relics connected to the Whitmores had either disposed of them or, over generations, absorbed them so deeply into tradition that their true origins were forgotten. The remains of the victims scattered across unmarked graves, hidden in reliquaries or held in secret collections, were reduced to silent artifacts, their real histories known only to a vanishing few. Then, in 1923, during renovations at the Pennsylvania Historical Society, workers uncovered a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf, the sealed records of the Whitmore case, a dark legacy uncovered hidden deep within the archives. Under an unassuming title lay the sealed records of the Whitmore case, documents reportedly placed there by Elijah Thompson himself as a safeguard, in case official records were ever erased. Recognizing their historical weight, the director of the society that discovered them made a controversial decision. The documents would be preserved, but access would remain tightly controlled. Only select researchers with special clearance could view them. It was through this limited access that historians slowly unraveled the true scale of the Whitmore family's disturbing operations and their lasting influence on American religious practice. But what truly shook investigators wasn't just the network of deception, it was what remained. Later studies confirmed a chilling fact. Relics crafted from human remains processed by the Whitmore family continued to exist in church collections well into the 20th century. Some may still remain today. A quiet 1967 survey identified 11 churches across the eastern United States that held objects matching descriptions found in the Whitmore ledger. Most church leaders were unaware of their origins. When confronted with the evidence, reactions ranged from horrified cooperation to firm denial and, in some cases, outright refusal to investigate further. One structure looms large in this tale, the Harmony Meeting House, where the Whitmore family once worshipped. Though the congregation disbanded in the early 1800s, the stone building still stands. Over the decades, it served various roles: schoolhouse before falling into abandonment in the 1930s. Locals speak of a strange unease surrounding it, especially at night. Some refuse to walk past it after dark, citing an overwhelming sense of dread. Is it the power of legend or something far more real? But perhaps the most disturbing legacy of the Whitmore family isn't found in the artifacts they left behind, but in the damage they did to the collective psyche of the faithful. The idea that sacred objects revered, prayed over, believed to possess divine power were, in fact, the grotesque trophies of serial murder is deeply unsettling. It challenges our understanding of faith itself. How could such evil hide beneath such holiness? The Whitmore story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What if belief itself has the power to create miracles even when the object of that belief is a lie? Reports of healings, visions, and spiritual experiences tied to these relics came from individuals with no connection to the Whitmore family. Were these simply coincidences? Or does faith, sincere and absolute, shape reality in ways we don't fully understand? In 1992, ground-penetrating radar was used to survey the former Whitmore property. It revealed strange underground anomalies chambers and what appeared to be a filled-in mine shaft. Archaeologists confirmed the presence of structures consistent with old records, but no human remains were found. Disturbed by the implications, the current landowners halted further excavation. The site was reburied, declared historically significant, and closed to the public. The last verified Whitmore relic was quietly removed in 2005 from a small Lutheran church in western Pennsylvania. Its current whereabouts remain undisclosed. This dark chapter in American religious history has captured your imagination. Be sure to like this video and subscribe for more spine-chilling stories and buried truths. Join our community of true mystery seekers and ask yourself, what secrets might be hiding in your local church? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We're just getting started. When renovation crews began restoring the old church, they uncovered something chilling: a hidden compartment behind the altar. Inside, carefully wrapped in a faded velvet pouch, was a small bundle, and a letter dated 1788. Upon learning of the discovery, the church's pastor arranged for DNA testing. The results were both conclusive and horrifying. The contents were human tissue. The remains were later laid to rest in the church cemetery, beneath a simple stone that reads, "Unknown Child of God, finally at rest." But the story doesn't end there. The Whitmore family estate, where this twisted chapter began, changed ownership many times after being confiscated and sold by the state. And yet, one portion of the property, the land where the infamous workshop once stood, remained untouched. Over generations, owners reported something strange. Crops planted there refused to grow. and animals avoided grazing on that patch of soil. Locals began to whisper that the land was cursed, and each year, on chilly November nights, especially around the 17th, some say a faint, glowing outline of the old workshop appears in the darkness. No structure has stood there in over 200 years, but the land remembers. If this tale of hidden horrors and religious exploitation gave you chills, share it with someone who loves unsettling truths. Hit like to support our ongoing investigation into America's forgotten terrors, and subscribe so you never miss what we uncover next. But beyond the eerie legends and haunted soil lies a deeper, more unsettling truth. The true legacy of the Whitmore case is not just the crime but the cover-up. For decades, both church and state worked to suppress the story. Their goal: protect reputations, preserve institutions, erase the victims. And in doing so, the dead were buried not just in graves but in silence. The devout men and women whose bodies were defiled after death. The innocent children whose lives were stolen in the name of twisted faith. These victims were robbed twice, first by murder, then by historical erasure. Somewhere in eastern Pennsylvania, fragments of their remains still rest in unmarked graves. Others, disturbingly, may reside in relics still venerated by the faithful saints, unknowingly made from suffering. Their scattered bones mirror the fragmented history we're left with, pieces preserved, others hidden, the full truth never fully told. So the next time you enter a church and gaze upon a relic in a glass case, ask yourself, do you know its true origin? In that moment of doubt, that spark of questioning, you honor those whose voices were silenced, because no institution's image is more sacred than the truth. What do you think? Was everything truly revealed, or do relics across the world still hides dark secrets? Leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this dark journey into forgotten history, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who craves mysteries lurking in the shadows of faith. Because some stories refuse to stay buried, and some spirits never truly rest.